You know how every time there's a conversation on leftist or egalitarian movements, there's always that one person who says, socialism never works. But did you ever wonder why?
What if the world financial structure, commerce, and trade as we know it is a complete fabrication? What if the events that have taken place over the last 70 years were not only predictable, but planned? Most people wouldn't be able to tell. It's the only thing most of us have ever known. But we could see the results of this destabilization today. I'm going to be talking about Blue Collar Empire by Jeff Schurke, published by Verso in 2024. Let's just say the US got off to a bad start with workers' rights, even before it was a country, since Columbus stepped off the boat to the ugliest stain of our history, owning human beings, which legal ownership by race was a uniquely American policy. By the Industrial Revolution, independent producers and entrepreneurs are idealized and celebrated, while those either physically or economically coerced into toiling for others have traditionally been shamed or scorned.
Really, it stems from the idea that if you're poor, it's your fault, and somehow you're immoral.
What grew out of the shadow of industrial capitalism of the 1800s and early 1900s was a diverse plane of leftist thought and philosophy. Socialists, communists, anarchists, populists, and reformers of all types headed the ranks of many labor organizations and social movements.
Because organized labor in principle is inherently leftist. Organized labor is the movement of the workers who produce the capital banding together to get a fair share of the profits. It stands in direct conflict to unbridled capitalism and seeks to institute some kind of regulations that might keep it in check. So much so that in the 1800s, it was actually considered a conspiracy against commerce and illegal.
But in 1886, a labor organization rebranded to distance itself from radicalism. This was the American Federation of Labor, or the AFL. They would move to work inside the confines of industrial capitalism to demand a better deal for skilled, light-complexioned workers. The AFL, seeking status among electeds and business alike, sought to protect the capitalist order, including foreign matters, contending that it was good for business, an early version of trickle-down economics, leaving labor dependent on a benevolent state.
And therein lies the problem. You see, in 1912, over 1,200 people from the Socialist Party were elected to public office, most of them from Oklahoma, oddly enough. Movements like these were growing in power, and for good reason. They put workers directly in the driver's seat.
And if you're trying to establish yourself as a legitimate partner in the elite classes, like the AFL was, your members better be compliant. After some 40-odd years of internal struggle, leftists had all but been extinguished from the limelight of the labor movement. You can read all about that in Labor and Communism by Bert Cochran.
The remnants of that era still last today. In my union's constitution, you can be brought up on charges for fostering a communist. And in my local bylaws, you can't hold office for at least 20 years if you were a part of the Communist Party. 3 to 13 years if you did some really awful stuff. I guess communism's worse.
Which brings us to the main subject of this book. I've done videos on the New Men of Power by C. Wright Mills, and I would consider this book its sequel in that it picks up right where that book left off. After the Great Depression and WW2, Washington planners built an international capitalist system backed by military forces, but it was not a traditional colonialist system. It was a shadow empire of imperialism.
And a major world superpower that's hoping to create a worldwide movement of workers is kind of a damper on your party.
This idea was not new. It was seen by political and financial elites after the Depression of 1893 that overseas markets could keep up profits, even under American underconsumption. This led to many occupations in the 1800s.
But what was new was countries wanting to nationalize their resources and redistribute wealth, which was directly against U.S. corporate interests. Luckily, there was an organization that had decades of experience of overthrowing and thwarting leftist movements, and the AFL, they were all too happy to become part of the good old boys club.
From the 1940s all the way through to the 90s, union funds worked in tandem with U.S. funds to support foreign campaigns, conventions, and educational programs in an effort to train workers around the world the principles of business unionism, or in other words, how to be compliant and subservient to corporate imperialism. If these sovereign countries did not comply, efforts would escalate. CIA operatives, along with union officers, would call for mass strikes through union puppet organizations to cripple their economy, and then use that as an example of why leftist movements were bad for workers. When strikes failed, full-on overthrows were orchestrated, like the infamous Guatemala United Fruit Incident of 1954 that led to the installation of dictator Castillo Armas, a civil conflict, and over 200,000 people meeting their untimely end. The liberty of these sovereign people was replaced with U.S. corporate rule, and the voice of those people would be lost for a generation. Some of these operations included Guyana with Cheddi Jagan, France with the General Confederation of Labor, Argentina with Juan Perón, Cuba, Dominican Republic with Juan Bosch, Brazil with Goulart, Congo with Patrice Lumumba, Vietnam, and Chile with Salvador Allende, and everyone's favorite, Venezuela, with funding from the National Endowment for Democracy to fund anti-Chavez forces, strikes, and lockouts. I plan on touching on all of these subjects in future videos.
The US and the AFL preferred brutal authoritarians over leftist movements of people. It's because authoritarians can be bought and sold. Who knows? Maybe it would have been worse if these countries were successful in egalitarian reforms. But we don't have the right to make that decision for them. These coordinated efforts led to the loss of countless thousands, destabilizing whole regions of the world and losing a whole entire generation. All for what? To fabricate an international financial structure that was funded on taxpayer money and union dues? Or was it to save us from a good example?
The worst part is, it didn't have to be like this. Unions were at the peak of their power at the start of the Red Scare and had every ability to use their strength to advocate for a robust worker state, but they didn't. In 1947, private sector union membership was at 35%. By the end of the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was only 11%, and this was by no coincidence.
When little men of power demand respect, they set up autocratic systems to suppress dissent. This is the importance of rank-and-file unionism. We can't prevent all of these things from happening around the world, but we sure as hell don't have to let our unions be the cause of it.